I want to introduce to you Sandra Bermúdez. She's a reporter for Noticiero Telemundo 48 at 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock here in the Bay Area. Sandra was previously the morning anchor for Primera Edición at Univision and for Vive la Mañana at KSTR Unimás 49 in Dallas. She began her journalism career in Mexicali, where she worked as an anchor for Televisa. So help me welcome Sandra Bermúdez. Thank you, Sandra.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. Hello, everybody. That was a great introduction, by the way. The nicest one ever. Well, it's really a pleasure being here with all of you. It's really nice to see all these young faces that, we know that all of you have a really great interest in our community and politics, and which is something I never had when I went to college. So that's why now that I'm a journalist, try to get involved as much as I can, of course, because of the impact that we can make in our community. But thank you so much for inviting us. And first of all, okay, let me take a seat. Thank you. I'm going to introduce a little bit our panel. Of course, most of you already know them. We've seen them on TV, right? Yeah, a little bit.
Not as much as you.
Well, we're going to start with California State Senator Alex Padilla. I'm just going to, just talk a little bit about him. State Senator Alex Padilla grew up in San Fernando Valley and was elected to the State Senate in November 2006 after having served for 7.5 years on the Los Angeles City Council, a position to which he was elected when he was just 26 years old. That's a great example for all of you guys, really. He is the current president of the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, NALEO. He has served as president of the League of California Cities and was both its youngest ever president and the first Latino to lead the league. Please, a big, big applause for him, because he is definitely a big example for all of youth here. All right. So now we're going to introduce California State Assembly Speaker Pro Tem Nora Campos. Nora Campos is the Speaker, please, a big applause. Hi, how are you? Is the Speaker Pro Tempore of the California Assembly and serves as the presiding officer for Assembly First Session. Speaker Pro Tempore Campos served San Jose for nearly a decade as a council member from 2001 to 2010. One of her most notable accomplishments was turning a neglected high-crime area in East San Jose into a bustling shopping center that increased the economically struggling community's tax base by 105%. That's a big, big accomplishment. Please, big applause for her. We need that, for sure. María Teresa Kumar. She is the president and CEO of Voto Latino and an Emmy-nominated contributor to MSNBC. In 2013, Elle named her one of the 10 most influential women in Washington, D.C., and she has also been named by Hispanic Business among the 100 most influential Latinos in America and by Poder magazine as one of the 20 most influential Latinos under 40. Maria Teresa, I want to hang out with you a little more. Please, a big applause for her.
This company right here, actually.
With all of you, of course. Okay, so basically it's going to be a very casual conversation. We have a few questions, and some of the questions are going to be directed to somebody specifics. Other questions are going to be, for everybody. So, okay, this question goes to everybody. In March, we reached a huge milestone here in California, with Latinos now being the largest single ethnic group in the state. We're 38% of the population here. What does this mean for us politically? And I'm going to start with you, Senator.
Well, it's a big number, right? 17, we're the largest segment of the California population, not a majority, but the largest section. And if we look at census statistics, we know that 51% of Californians under the age of 18 are Latino. So it's not just now, temporarily, that we're the largest segment of the population. The trend is going to continue. But what it means in terms of political power or participation, all it means is opportunity. It does not mean it's a guarantee. Because a lot of people think, well, we have the numbers. We have the numbers. We're going to be in charge, or we're going to have a stronger voice. The opportunity is there. The potential is there. But the only way it translates into a true political voice is if we do something with those numbers. And that do something means we need to register and we need to vote. That's what I think it means.
Speaker Pro Tem Campos, what do you think?
Well, I'm looking out in the audience, and How many of you are under the age of 35? So just to add on to the senator's comments, the reality is what we do with those numbers. It's not a guarantee. And I think if I take it from just a smaller perspective, looking at where we're at in the Assembly and in the Senate, we know that we are 38% of the population, but what doesn't reflect that in Sacramento. So for us to even be truly represented in the state of California, we have a lot of work to do. But I'm hopeful that's why I asked that question, because we talk about the future, but the reality is the future is here, and the reality is that with all of you here going back to your networks and owning the responsibility to say, I am going to take a leadership role in what I learned today and go back to an organization that you're a part of, or say I'm going to expand what the Voto Latino is doing on a national level and bring it back home. And I share that with you because at one time, and we weren't going to talk about years, I was in the same place that you're at and sat around a table with the elders, and they talked about, we're going to create this organization so that we have more representation here in the city of San Jose. And I heard it, and I heard it, and nothing got done. So then when I had the ability to be in a position of leadership, I said, I'm going to make that happen. And we created a leadership academy that takes individuals like yourself. We're not focused on high school and college, but individuals like yourself that are already in their profession, and we mentor them, and we share with them the data that shows where California is at and where we're lacking, so that they can go back to their entities and use that information to encourage Latinos to register to vote and to be part of the change in the Democrat, whether it's on a board or a commission. And I have to say that we have 25% of those boards and commissions here in the city of San Jose, represented by Latinos. So it's up to you.
For sure. Maria Teresa, what are your thoughts?
I think what both Senator Padilla and Assemblywoman Nora Campos said is right on the mark, is that we have to figure out how do we actually start building ourselves and our infrastructure and our network in order for us to start building the pipelines that we need. Oftentimes, our community is underserved, not because we don't have the ideas, but because we're not tapping into our talent and building the pipeline of leadership. And that's really the purpose of why we're here today. We've been doing this now for 10 years, and I mentioned last night, when we first started, one of the first things that people said was that Voto Latino, we were going to waste our time because we were going to talk to Latinos and millennials in English using technology, and that was the only way to do it. How could we scale so quickly? In those 10 years, though, we've seen a lot of backlash in other parts of the country when it comes to Latino participation. California is at the forefront of modernizing our election system in ways that I wish the rest of the country would follow. You guys can now you can register to vote online directly with the Secretary of State's. You're right now pushing for, which is actually one of the bills that Voto Latino helped promote. You are now looking for same-day registration. There's getting increasingly not an excuse for not having participation. And if we want to be in the driver's seat of where we're taking our country, we have to go to the polls. How many folks here are familiar with the Voting Rights Act? So the Voting Rights Act basically was a piece of legislation that came out of the 1960s guaranteeing certain sections of the country that they basically had to be okay to ensure that there was no poll tax or discrimination at the ballot box. Right now you have over 22 states that are trying to pass these measures of basically blocking our vote. Last year, the Supreme Court stripped the Voting Rights Act and basically said it had to go back into Congress. It came out of Shelby County, Alabama. Shelby County is number 5 of the top 5 counties in the country with the fastest Latino growth. Alabama. So Shelby County, it's not a surprise that they said, oh my gosh, we have a bunch of brown people, what do we do?
So what they did is that they're blocking our vote because they're trying to figure out how to legislate to us. California, we don't have that problem. We have to figure out how are we participating so that we can continue being that example for the rest of the country, not to fear us, but to see us as an opportunity to take the United States into the 21st century. And I think that's what we have to voice that power.
And actually, we're going to stay with you, Maria Teresa. Within the Latino population, actually, the fastest growing segment is the millennial group, actually, those who are sitting here with us today. How can they help shape the face of politics now and in the future?
I think we said it. We want you guys to run for office, right? We want you to, so I actually say two things. Run for office and make lots of money so that you can actually reinvest in your communities. And I think that that's something that we have to continue talking about.
And I think one of the things that you have said, we know that the power of a dollar invested in an individual or a political cause like Voto Latino is important. And I think we as a force need to feel that when we give to a contribution or to Voto Latino or to whatever organization that's going to advance the Latino agenda, that it's an investment that you believe in and that you feel good about it. Because we all invest in certain things and we get a return. Investing in something that's going to be good for our community, you will see a return that will benefit you. So I appreciate that we need to start talking about investing in our community from the standpoint of a contribution as well.
Well, thank you. That was not planned, and thank
No,
you. That's
no.
not what I meant. We do appreciate. But what I was talking about is oftentimes we in the Latino community, we see one of the ways to make change is only through getting elected, and I think we need to do that. But we also have to recognize the business leadership and how they shape policy and they influence policy. So Voto Latino wants you to be the best at whatever it is you choose to do, whether it's the arts, but are you going to be the next CEO of Facebook? We have to start thinking those possibilities and then building those raíces, those roots, so that we do see the infrastructure that our community needs, and we start aspiring to that in a way that there's no question that we are capitalizing on our abilities.
And Senator Padilla, I want to ask you as far as how can we encourage our young people to be interested in politics? What can we do now?
What can we do? Well, there's a couple of ways, and let me sort of pick one right now. I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm asking the question. So raise your hand if you're perfectly happy with everything in your community right now. Nobody, right?
All right.
Things can and should be better, whether you think it's the Latino community across the country or just in your physical neighborhood where you live. And so now that you're aware of that, the question and the challenge is this: what are you going to do about it? How are you going to step up and be a leader in your community to bring about the change that we're now aware is necessary? And so to go back to Maria Teresa's point, I learned a long time ago, the leadership does not equal the title that you have. Right. It just so happened that when I was 25, even before I turned 26, I decided to run for city council to represent the community I grew up in the city of Los Angeles. People tried telling me I was too young. Either I didn't want to listen or maybe I just didn't know any better. But the voters took a chance on me. But even in that decision to run for office and during the course of the campaign, something was very, very real in my mind. What would happen if I didn't win my election? Right? So for me, it wasn't about I have to be the councilman, I have to be an elected official to make a change in my community. I already had my answer. If I didn't win, I wasn't going anywhere, because if I was committed to why I was running, to make my community better, I just have to find a different position from which to work to make that happen. Maybe become a teacher, maybe try to open up a business, maybe run a nonprofit. Maybe there's a lot of ways that you can work to improve your community. But you know what? We get a lot of messages all the time. We should be, Latinos should be better represented in corporate America, or as business owners, or as doctors and engineers, and it's all important, but we can't lose sight of the fact that we also need to be better represented when it comes to government and politics. And sometimes that's being an elected official, and sometimes that means just working in how many Latino chiefs of staff are in the California State Capitol or in the United States Congress, or heads of important departments or agencies that are important for our community.
Well, and I think, just to touch upon that briefly, I think especially coming in Congress, people oftentimes don't realize that Congress helps legislate for the rest of the country, but increasingly, the average age in the US House of Representatives is 65 years old. The average American is 44 years old. The average Latino American is 27, right? So when we start talking about building a pipeline and sometimes saying, you know, what's happening in Washington? What's happening in Washington is that they're disconnected in a generational sense. So it's how do we bring those generations together to solve the problems that at the end of the day you're going to inherit if you're not paying attention.
Now this question is for Speaker Pro Tem Campos. What do you think, based on your experience, are the most important issues for Latino voters here in California specifically?
Thank you for the question, and I think that from California, we know that, and I feel so honored to be a part of a delegation that really thinks outside of the box, and we're bold. I mean, we passed the DREAM Act. Minimum wage for the state of California. And I can go on and on and on of some of the things that we, you know, AB 60, which means that everybody has a driver's license here, regardless of your status. And I bring those things up because for California, we are shaping what the rest of the world, the rest of the U.S. should look like. And we're bold and we're pushing the envelope regardless of who the governor is. Because we believe that the things that we push forward are going to help all of the people that live in California. And we in the Assembly and the Senate, and that's why I say it matters who represents you. We have 24 Latino members right now. And all those bills were driven by the Latino caucus. And we were at the forefront talking to the governor and saying, these are our priorities, because they're going to be good for not only our community, but for California. And I think that it takes that type of leadership to say, we're going to move forward. Immigration is still on the forefront of our agenda. And I think that it should continue to be at the forefront in Congress. And one of the things that we have to continue to do here is we need to hold our, and this goes to Maria Teresa's, you know, comments about if we're not involved, then we're going to inherit the leadership in Congress. And they're going to determine what our issues and our priorities are. So it is important for us to continue to move forward and say that these are the issues that are important for us. Jobs. Jobs is a priority for us, and people don't understand that. If our families are not able to work, the amount of stress that creates on a family because they don't have a paycheck coming in, it affects the whole system of a family. So I would say immigration, I would say jobs, and I would say one of the #1 things that we have to continue to address is education. I was just sharing with Maria Teresa, because we both have young children, but making sure that our children's infrastructure within the state of California is that all children have access to a great education so that they can be the future and have those jobs in the high tech, or be the teachers, or be CEOs, or if they choose to do something else with their hands, whether it's in the trades, that they're the ones designing those buildings, as well as making sure that they're picking the workforce. So those I think are the issues, not only for California, but I also think for the United States. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for a great answer. Now, Maria Teresa, you mentioned it earlier as far as the fact that there are some states that are traditionally not known as Latino states, but there's a lot of them out there: North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Kentucky, and even Utah. Now, how do you think Latinos will affect the balance of electoral power in those specific states?
So the fastest growing states right now of the Latino population are Tennessee, South Carolina, and Alabama. I mean, folks don't realize that when we start talking about monumental change, it's increasingly going down to the margins. I'll give you a perfect example. So Eric Cantor, how many folks know Eric Cantor Eric Cantor was the former speaker, the majority whip of the House, and he had an election in a special election where he lost by 7,000 votes. And one of the principal reasons that he lost by 7,000 votes was that he took no stand on immigration. Behind closed doors, he was promoting immigration, but he didn't have the courage to say it out loud. He lost by 7,000 votes. He had a total of 60,000 Latino registered voters and Asian registered voters. That if you talk to Asians and Latinos, what motivates them, what wakes them up, what gives them fire to talk about other issues is immigration reform. Had he mentioned something about immigration reform during his platform, I bet you a percentage of those 60,000 people would have gotten out of their living rooms, into their cars, into the voting booth. And I share that story because it was something that, conversely, in South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, another Republican, came out strong for immigration reform. He was one of the folks that basically said, this is right for our country, I don't care what you say. He won his reelection to a Tea Party candidate because of the Latino vote. So when we start talking about tight elections, increasingly, it's all about the margins, and you have to have a conversation with all voters, but you also have to give them a reason to go out to the polls. Our function at Voto Latino is to turn you on to politics. It's the party's responsibilities to date you. And they better call you the next day, because then you will have another place to go.
Thank you so much. Senator Padilla, what policies, laws, or actions can be put into place to encourage higher levels of Latino political participation, not just in the general elections, but in every election?
Well, first I want to just sort of add on to María Teresa's answer from the previous question, because to me it's actually pretty simple. Unfortunately, we'd only hear about it once every 4 years. Yeah. Every time there's a presidential election, right? If you watch the news, what do they put up? There's a big map, and they have red states and blue states, and the whole presidential election is going to come down to a handful of what they call battleground states, right? Those states are the ones that determine who's going to be president of the United States. And what are those battleground states? I hear Nevada in all those conversations, Colorado, Florida. Florida's a big one. Does it go this way? Does it go that way? But even states like Virginia and Maryland, Arizona, New Mexico. What do those states all have in common? A lot of Latinos in those states. So increasingly, it is the Latino community that is the swing vote. It is our community, if we vote and how we vote, that determines who's going to be president of the United States. I know this because in my spare time, I serve as president of an organization called NALEO, the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. It's a bipartisan group, federal, state, and local officials, and this is what we do. How do we make sure that the doors are wide open for Latinos to participate in our democracy? And so for a long time we've studied, what works with older Latino voters, younger Latino voters, conservative voters, liberal voters, very frequent voters, infrequent voters, immigrants that have become citizens, or people who, families that have been here for generations. When it comes to younger voters, this is something that we look to Voto Latino for some guidance here, because they have unabashedly focused on young voters with technology, like you said. If you ask a lot of political experts, they say, oh, don't waste your time talking to young people because they hardly ever vote. Don't waste your money. Or when they talk about the Latino community, it's like, oh, but haven't you heard of the digital divide? You have to do it sort of old-fashioned ways if you're going to talk to Latinos. Well, look, Latinos are diverse. And we're young, we're old, we're in the East Coast, we're in the West Coast. My parents don't have email, but all our generation, we're all on, Facebook and Twitter and all the social media sites. So we're everything.
They're not there anymore on Facebook. They're on
I
Snapchat
know,
or something.
it's the whole next thing, Instagram, and keep going. But we're everything and everything in between. So the two things that I think most people look to get more people excited and turning out to vote. Again, if you talk to the experts, they say, oh, voters are pretty discontented, I guess, and people just don't turn out. Look at the June primary in California, record low turnout, and that's been the trend, with one exception in the last 10 years. Anybody know what that one exception was? In 2008, there was a guy by the name of Barack Obama running for president.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a record high turnout, not just here, but around the country. You know, if only we had that level of excitement in every election. And I think part of that is, you know, making sure that we all understand and share with our friends and our neighbors and our family. Every election matters. There's no such thing as an off-year election. There's no such thing as a midterm election. Because whether it's for President of the United States, or for school board, or for mayor, or for state assembly, or for Congress, or for governor, every election is important.
And just to piggyback briefly on why, just to highlight how important these elections are. In 2012 in Ferguson, 56% of the population went and voted. 56%. President Barack Obama was on the ballot. They came out in record number. A year later, in 2013, for their municipal elections, when they had to decide their mayor, who then identifies their police chief and everybody else, 6% came out to vote. So it's not a surprise that right now Ferguson is having the friction it has, because they have an elected body that doesn't represent the community that they come from and has a lot of cultural problems trying to understand them. But at the end of the day, it was the responsibility of that community to participate. And they have a history of doing it because they did it the year before.
Right. And think about what that means. You know, think about what your community, I asked earlier, right? Are you happy with the way things are? And if not, you know, what are the issues? I know one of my reasons for running, even though people told me I was too young, you know, I grew up in an area that never got its fair share of attention from anybody, right? Crime was high in my community. The President of the United States can do a little bit to help, but the mayor, the city council, the police chief, they can do a lot more. You know, if you're not happy with what's happening in your schools, the President of the United States and your U.S. Senator can help a little bit, but your school board members and the superintendent of schools can do a heck of a lot more. So these local elections are just as important, you know, maybe even more so for the real near-term issues affecting our community.
Speaker Pro Tem Campos, how have you seen the Latino vote make a difference right here in California? And if you can share with us some success stories.
Well, I think the Latino vote has made a huge difference here. But let me just take it from use this example. We know that we've been talking about the election in 2012. We know that half of the Latinos, about 11 million, around 11 million, that are registered to vote did not vote. Isn't that shocking? I mean, we're registered to vote and we're not participating. And I think that as we continue to move forward, I mean, Latinos tend to support Latinos if they have their best interests at heart. And Latinos tend to support people who address the issues that may be in their community that are not being addressed by the current governing board. So I think that it's going to be very telling for us as we move forward in California with the issues that are before us, the electeds that are before us, whether we're going to continue to be able to grow our numbers with electeds at the state, local, and I think when this election, we think is going to be a low turnout, I'm hoping, there's always a hope that it won't be, is going to determine a lot of things. We have something on the ballot right now that the governor is, you know, pushing about water. I mean, every Latino should be going to the polls and voting, because the reality is, though Central Valley and other parts of California, I mean, water is so important to us. We have some communities that don't even have safe drinking water. People don't know that even though we're in the 10th largest city, our water is not recommended for women that are pregnant or children under the age of 2. People don't know that statistic. So the reality is there's not enough. So my point, your point is, what do we think is going to happen and why do we think it's important? That it is our responsibility as a community that tends to have the highest numbers to encourage ourselves and our family members and others that we need to start seeing civic engagement as a must, not an option. It is not an option for us anymore. It is a must. I was having a conversation earlier today, and we were talking about elections, and I said, you know, when I was 18, I registered. It was part of my family. I have yet to miss an election. I have yet to, and I'm proud of that. And why am I proud about that? Because I know that when there's someone said, when there was a governor at one time, and I went to a different state, they said, oh my God, you guys elected a movie star? And I said, I didn't elect that movie star. I voted for the other person. But I could say that because I cast my vote. So for the Latinos, we can determine who represents us, not only in the state of California, but the next president.
Thank you so much for that answer. Maria Teresa, this question goes for you. In the last 2 years, our voting rights have been under attack from the courts and from individual jurisdictions. How can we educate ourselves and be prepared for Election Day?
Well, one is that there's a great organization called League of Women Voters, and if you have any questions on whether you're registered, what kind of polls, where your poll location is, all of that good stuff, you can go to vote411.org, and they have all that information. NALEO, he mentioned as well, has a great website so that it's a 1-800 number, and you could go do that. But more importantly is, how do you prepare yourself for election, is start having the conversations. Start having the conversations at the dinner table, start having the conversations. I came from my family. My family has no idea. I think I had the wrong drinking water. My family has no idea what got me turned on with politics. I'm completely political in an apolitical family. But what turned me on was that I would spend my summers back in Bogota, Colombia, and I'd see the difference where Latinos were the majority, and they were doing everything, right? They were the cleaning lady, but they were also the lawyer and the judge. It was a different type of opportunity. And coming here, though, in the United States, I also recognized that my mother was a single mom in Colombia with a very limited education. By the nature of my birth, my opportunity was capped. I wouldn't be able to enjoy the fruits of hard work in Colombia just because it was very constricted to class. In the United States, the field was open. And so when we start having that conversation of the importance of politics and it plays and how you define yourself, if we aren't participating, we won't be able to enjoy what America has to offer. Right now, we have so many people so what drives my passion for Voto Latino is because not so long ago, I was sitting there with dreams and with opportunity, and my mom keeps saying, my mom's conversation with me on education was very similar to her conversation with, safe sex, which was, her safe sex talk to me was very much like, sabes lo bueno y lo malo. No hagas lo malo. Okay, Mom. You're like, you know the good and the bad, don't do the bad. And that was it. How am I going to get to college? She's like, you're going to college. How am I going to get there? That's up to you. That was literally like, there was no roadmap. And when it comes to helping define yourself, what I found along the way was that every point, whether I was working in government or whether I was working at a nonprofit or whether I was working in business, government had a say and a hand in the direction of all of everything. Everything leads back to that. Whether it's clean drinking water, safe streets, whether it's regulation on your privacy with your smartphone, everything leads back to that. And the only way that we can actually define what those policies look like is if we participate. Every single one of us pays taxes. Every single one, whether we do it through our IRS or whether you go to you buy a candy bar, you're paying taxes. For whatever reason, the Latino community is the only one that doesn't care where those taxes go to. And I use this as an example. How many times have you guys walked into a Walmart, put 20 bucks down, and then walk away and leave the merchandise behind? That would be crazy. But we basically spend billions and billions of dollars of our money, of our revenue. And other cities and other parts of the cities have beautiful education and beautiful streets and beautiful libraries. But it's because we're not participating. And the moment we flex that muscle and have those conversations and break it down to our community, that's how we prepare ourselves for elections.
Now, I'm from Mexico, from Tijuana, Mexico, and I have the idea that as a part of our culture, unfortunately, in Mexico, not a lot of people vote because we somehow lost a little bit of faith in our government. Do you guys think, and I wish that you both can answer this question, do you guys think that that's something that we're carrying from, our parents, our grandparents, that maybe, yeah, we'll vote, but things are not going to change maybe?
I'll use a real example. You asked me to use examples. So you talked about the Story and King area. That area had been a place that nobody would want to go to unless they had to. It's a predominantly Latino community, and our community walks. Not everybody has a car, so we use public transportation or we walk to the closest place. When I was running, I was the only woman and the only Latina, and there were 3 men running against me. It was interesting. When I went out, and I was the youngest, and people were like, you're too young, the same thing, but I wasn't as young as him. But because I was from the community, I knew the issue. And I had to see that place for my whole childhood, and no one did anything about it. And I share that with you because when I would go out to my community, I went to a lot of coffees, and I went to a lot of neighborhood groups to say what I would do for them. But then at some point I said, I want to hear what you want in your community. I already knew, because that's why I ran, because I wanted to change. I wanted to improve the quality of life for my community as well as my family. And the one thing they said to me, which I think we just hold ourselves to a higher standard, our community holds us to a higher standard, and if we don't deliver, it's like you're part of the family, you're going to hear about it, is we're tired of money not coming to our community. We pay taxes, we do this, we do that, and nothing comes to our community. And for whatever reason, it didn't come. So when I got elected, I said, there's one thing I have to do, is I have to deliver for my community. And so fast forward 14 years later, my community trusts me and they hold me accountable. But they watched every step I did as an elected, because I didn't give them permission, because I don't think we need permission, but I said to them, give me 4 years, and if I don't deliver and improve your quality of life, then you should elect somebody else. But I wasn't afraid to say that, and I wasn't afraid to hold myself accountable, because I had the same investment that they had, was to make sure that our community was at a better standard. And I'm going to throw this out, because you talked about taxpayer money. $100 million went to that corner. That was $100 million that could have gone somewhere else, but it came to a Latino community. And I got a lot of slack from other parts of the city that are non-Latino. But my point is, to her, just to validate what she says, we all pay taxes, and why shouldn't that money be coming to our community so that our community has a better life?
Thank you. María Teresa?
So one of the things that we keep hearing right now is immigration reform, and how tired we are because we don't have immigration reform passed, and how we've marched and we've done everything and we're just tired and we feel frustrated and all of that. And then I have folks take a step back and say, but guys, we started la lucha for this immigration reform in 2006. In 2006, we marched, and this is where we keep forgetting how powerful our voice is. Everybody in the world has heard of the Arab Spring, of the organizing that took place on Twitter and on Facebook. Everybody's heard of what's happening outside the borders when it comes to using technology to mass organize. But do you know that the first people in the world to use technology to organize, to march to our streets was the Latino community in 2006. We culminated 2 million people marching safely for comprehensive immigration reform. It's our country's biggest civil rights marches in our nation's history. We don't know our history, and we're living it right now. So in 2006, that happened. In 2008, we came out in record numbers, and people had immigration on the brain. 2010, people got really scared of those immigration numbers. And so we saw Proposition 187 here in California, the blueprints going to Arizona. going to Georgia, going to Alabama. Over 23 states thought that that was the way to keep us quiet, but we weren't quiet. Because in 2011, we actually demanded that we have the DREAM Act. And while it did not pass Congress, people were paying attention. And whether they wanted to or not, in 2012, all of a sudden, people had to pass some sort of comprehensive immigration reform. And that's when we got DACA, deferred action. Right. That's our work. And then the following year, we came out in record numbers in 2012. And in 2013, the Senate, whether they liked it or not, passed it in bipartisan support. Yes, it's stalled, you guys, right now in the House of Representatives, but it's because they don't expect us to come out again. They don't expect us. And we're saying, oh my God, after 8 years, you guys were really tired. But you know what? Let's take a playbook from the women's suffrage movement, from the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Actually, you know what? Let's actually take it from the LGBT community, that they changed history. It took them 20 years to get where they are today. It's taking us 8 to get into the same position. And it's because we're organizing and we're talking and we're finding unlikely allies, and we have to continue to do that. And we cannot get tired now because we're in the middle of it. And something else we have to learn from the LGBT community and from the women's choice community. What happened now, most recently, is that the administration basically said, you know what, it's not the political right thing to do for the president to sign an executive order for our families. Boehner, the Speaker of the House, said it's not the political thing to do to pass it in the House. You're telling us it's not the political thing to do? You know what we do? We have to organize, and we have to change the politics. Because until we change the politics, just like the LGBT community changed the politics, just like the women's rights suffrage changed the politics, just like the civil rights movements in the 1960s changed the politics, they're never going to feel like it's a necessity. They're only going to come to our house and knock on our door every 4 years. So we have to make sure that we continue building the pressure, and it's okay to flex, and it's okay for folks to fear us. Because what we want is to define America for our families, for the generation of Americans, for the sweat and pride that our parents brought us here, because they see the possibility of everyone in this room, but of our country. So yes, we might be tired, but you're asking me, how do we change the politics? We're living it. In less than 8 years, we've got one of the major pieces of civil rights in Congress, and yes, it's stalled, but it's not if it's going to pass, it's when it's going to pass, and when depends on us.
Thank you. Now, this question is for both of you as well. What is it at stake for Latinos during these midterm elections, and why is it so critical to get out and vote in November?
So we have voting on the brain, you guys. Did you get that sense of that panel?
Go ahead.
No, I mean, one of the biggest things for California, the midterms, for me, would be Proposition 47, where we have to reimagine how we actually reimagine our prison system so that it's not disproportionately affecting Black and brown youth. And we have to start taking control of that narrative. And for me, that would be the number one. And then also, there are incredible races all around the Central Valley that are 70% Latino, that are basically being represented by people that don't believe in immigration reform. Or they believe in immigration reform behind closed doors, but they don't have the political courage. In my opinion, if you don't have the political courage to be on the right side of history, on the right side of civil rights, you have no business being in a position.
Right. I think it's important for individuals, and especially our community, to vote all the time. You know, I often get asked when I do something that I think just the right thing, and people are like, why did it take so long to get that passed? Or why did it? And it's because there was no political will. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, because the people that had this office before me, or that had the ability to move certain policies in Sacramento or at the local level, didn't want to do it. They gave excuses that, oh, there was this barrier, or there was this barrier. And they didn't have the courage to do something that was maybe a little uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do. So I share that with you because as you go back and you're getting courted by different individuals, you need to be able to have the courage to say to them, but why haven't you done this, this, and that? You've been in office for 10 years. And if they give you an excuse, you need to say, that's not good enough for us anymore in our community. And unless you show us what you're doing, don't come knocking at my door anymore. It is our time. I am so overwhelmed with the amount of young people in this room. I went home and I was telling my husband, you couldn't believe the amount of young people that were excited about being part of this last night at the reception. If I get anything out of this, that's what I'm going to remember, the excitement in this room. Because we do get tired, but we're still very young in our movement. And it is important for us to, I want to talk about what we need to do. There's something we can learn from our mothers. How many of our mothers had comadres, but they weren't really their comadres because they never really baptized any of us, right? Right? But they had like 10 comadres, and you would go and they would say, this is your comadre, and you're like, okay. And then as you grow up, and they were like, well, how are you related to them, your comadre? And then you found out that they really are not, you're not really related, but, we can learn something because our parents and our mothers were having these conversations with their comadres, and things were getting done. They were getting done around the table or at school as they were picking us up, or, different things. So how many of you have, I'm going to kind of just, because I want you to walk away with something. How many of you have more than one network? And Maria Teresa talked about that we need to start talking about politics. Instead of talking about other things, I don't know what people talk about these days, we should be talking about some of these hard issues. So as you leave today and you're sitting around the kitchen table or you're out with your friends and you're talking about, insert something, insert a topic that you've learned about today. And ask them, what do you think? And then ask them, what are we going to do about that in our community? Or even at a statewide issue or a national issue. We should be bold enough to start having these conversations, and we should be asking our friends, are you going to vote? And if they say, I'm in this political world, but I have friends, and they're my closest friends, that sometimes I have to call them on election day and say, did you vote? And they're like, no. I said, well, then I'm coming to pick you up. No, you don't need to do that, because they're embarrassed. And I said, well, then you text me after you voted. But we need to start holding our own friends and families accountable for voting. It is our responsibility. I've said this, and I'm going to say it again. It is not a choice. It is our responsibility.
That's right. That's right. Now, you already mentioned it earlier. You mentioned it a little briefly earlier, but each election cycle, both parties like to court the Latino vote somehow, expecting for us to forget previous elections. Now, what is it that they have to keep in mind for this coming elections?
They were watching how they vote, because history matters. And I say that. I tell people that all the time. When they're like, you haven't, done this or that because they're upset about something. I said, go look at my record. And then they come back and they're like, okay, you have done a lot for the Latino community. Because sometimes people get caught up in one little issue. But I think it's important for us to say, I've been watching you, and your politics haven't been right with the Latino community. You haven't done anything for the Latino community. I understand that you're articulate, and you speak well, and you have a good rap, but I went and I looked at your record, and you haven't done anything. And if they're a newcomer, as Senator Padilla said, that he knew if he didn't win, he was still going to be part of that community because he had a history, right? You don't have to necessarily hold office to have a history of your involvement in the community. One of the things that I will never forget, when I ran, I was knocking on doors, and Campos, they would say, is your father Eloy Campos? And I would say, yes. Oh my God, I remember your father from Model Cities. And of course, I knew what Model Cities. It was a grassroots organization that was trying to revitalize a community that was blighted and didn't have curbs and gutters and all these things. So my point is, you don't have to hold office to be involved and to have a record.
Our time is over.
Our time's over.
No, no. Yeah. Do you have another mic? Nope, that's not working. It's not working.
All right. Hello, hello.
There we
Perfect.
go.
Oh,
Perfect.
great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, we have one more question. Are we going to have time for questions for the audience? Yeah? Okay, great. Okay, just one more question. And it goes for both of you. When it comes to playing politics, both the Democrats and the Republicans seem equally adept at promoting their interests at the expense of Latinos. The most recent example we saw just this week was the ad from the Allison Lundergan Grimes Senate campaign in Kentucky. What can we do as a community to make sure this doesn't keep happening?
I don't know how many folks heard the ad, but the ad basically, I'm going to paraphrase because I can't say it exactly, but basically said we don't have audio, right? We don't have audio. So basically it said that she would not vote for amnesty for illegal immigrant aliens. I love that phrase. And she never will. And this is a Democrat that's running in a very heated race. Well, the organizations around the country, it started off with Move On and then Upworthy and just unlikely allies saying that, first of all, not only is that language dated, but it's not acceptable. And organizations around the country sat her down and she was forced to pull the ad. But I think it talks about the beauty of technology and how you can't hide anymore. You can't hide your record, you can't hide what you say, you can't do it behind closed doors. And that the Latino community has an incredible group of allies that we may not realize, that are holding people accountable. And we have to continue finding those allies to help push our issues forward. But I want to talk just very briefly about organizing. So when we found out that the president wasn't going to do an executive order, I was incredibly frustrated. And so I get frustrated, and then as my staff knows, then I'm like, okay, what do we do about it? And so my first call was to Mi Familia Voto, who is with SCIU, and they do incredible grassroots organizing. I said, what if we create Hispanic Heritage Month, not just to celebrate our culture, but focus our community to register each other to vote? They were on board. The second phone call was to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, who's seen more on the conservative side. And I said, Javier Palomares, will you join us? Because this is not anymore about our political differences, but it's about the Latino voice coming together beyond our politics for the good of our community. He said, absolutely. In less than 7 days, we had over 85 organizations jump on board across political stripes, from Cosmo Latina, across industries, saying, let's start moving forward Hispanic Heritage Month, a time for us to concentrate our energies and flex our voting power. This was the first year. It's an experiment. But again, we had over 85 organizations jump on board. Our hope is that you join us, your networks, so that we start planning now for next year, so that we recognize that this is not what people do this is what Voto Latino does every day, but it's not what everybody else does every day. So how can we focus ourselves 2 to 3 times during Hispanic Heritage Month to register each other to vote? And I think that's an example of the community coming together and giving ourselves opportunity to unify as one voice, not just locally, but at a national level.
Well, there's not much more to say because, but I think that she's right on. I mean, it's important for us. I think one of the things that we have to continue to do is to make sure that we do build those allies. And I'm going to keep saying this, is that we have to hold people accountable and call them when they're not right with our community and when they're using language that is offensive to us. Yeah. And I think that we have the ability. I mean, just look around. This is your network. If you can get every single person's name in here and you guys are communicating, whether it's once a week, think of what you all could do as you go back to your own communities. It is our responsibility to continue to make sure that we're organizing and that we're not just leaving today and saying, oh, this was a wonderful place to be, because it is. It's been a phenomenal 48 hours, right?
Thank you.
A phenomenal 48 hours. But it is You wouldn't be here if you didn't have an interest of being part of the political change and shaping your future as well as the future of others. And maybe even making a change in your family's lives. You know, when President Obama was elected, people in the African community and I think in the Latino community said, wow, I thought I'd never see, we said, I thought I'd never see a person of color elected, right? The African American community said, I thought I'd never see a person, an African American person elected in my time. What we should be saying is, and we shouldn't say, I never thought, we need to say, in my time, the agenda will be the Latino agenda because it's the agenda that's good for all of our community. And we are going to be at the forefront making sure that what politics look like a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that our voice is not going to be the voice that people are thinking, well, we'll only give so much money so that we can kind of keep them at bay and make them happy. They're going to be, oh my God, I need to call X, Y, and Z, because if I don't have them on board with my agenda, my political career is not going to go anywhere. And that's what I want to leave you with. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, do we have time for some questions from the audience or no? Yes? All right. So, does anybody have any questions? Oh, yeah, over there. Let me give you the mic.
Can you stand up? Yeah, stand up.
Oh, hello. Oh, does it work? Okay, perfect. I just first and foremost want to say, Ms. Campos, I'm definitely inspired by you. I've heard about you. Oh.
There you go. You inspire me.
Oh, thank you. I've heard so many great things about you before Voto Latino. And so to hear and actually see you and hear you speak and engage with the audience and speak to the youth who are here, it's very enticing. It's very rich. It's very raw. And so I actually, when I was in high school, I told myself I wanted to run for assembly down in SoCal because I felt the same way. I felt that there wasn't enough representation for Latinos. I didn't feel there was enough representation for the Asian community. I didn't feel there was enough representation for Pacific Islanders in the community. And so as I hear you and I feel a little bit more encouraged and more motivated, and I remember hearing you saying you're motivated by your community. Who motivated you and encouraged you for your footsteps into your career right now?
I would say my parents. I talked about my father. My father actually worked for Ford Motor Company, and I know things have changed. And he had the opportunity to organize with Cesar Chavez. And so as I was a young child, my brother and I, we were very young, we went on a lot of those marches. And my parents didn't sit us down and say, these are the teachings. They actually took us along those teachings. And so they're a part of who I am. I didn't have a dream to hold political office, but I did have a dream to improve my community. And the one thing that I learned, that it was great when my parents were on the outside of the system trying to make changes, but if you could be part of the system, think of the changes that you could make. And so I have to say that my parents and my community, because I didn't want to run, and my community came to me and said, why aren't you running? You know us, you know what our needs are. And so I would have to say my parents and my community. Thank you for the question.
Anybody else have a question? Come on, I know. Oh, there we go. Over there.
You have a whole table over there.
Lady in the black shirt? Okay.
Oh, no. There we go. There we go. Hi, I'm Guadalupe Rodriguez, and my question is, speaking on behalf of the Latino community, what else can we do besides voting that will put pressure on the House of Representatives as well as our current president and hopefully another future Democratic president to pass a comprehensive immigration reform and just other opportunities that will impact Latinos directly and Latinos who may not necessarily be able to vote. So what else can we do besides voting?
Well, to address the folks that can't vote, I think that the Dreamers are an example of social movement building. In 2008, Voto Latino worked very closely with the United We Dream, and they were marching, they were doing everything right, and we invited them and said, well, why don't you encourage other folks to register since you can't? And so we did a very small campaign called Vote Because I Can't, and they ended up using that as a model that blew it out of the water in 2012, where they started doing the work in Arizona, Florida, and other places. So while folks may say, I can't, we all know someone who can. And those votes represented that part of the community. And so I think that's one thing. I think another thing for us to continue our involvement is to write letters to members of Congress, to hold them accountable when they don't, and to make it transparent. One of the biggest obstacles that we feel in the community, and at least I find, is that we feel like we don't have access to information. But when we get that access to information, we share it like wildfire. Flower, you know. I'm ESL, guys. Cut your break. But, and I think that's one of the things that you need to do, is like when you find something, an injustice, or when you find a voting record, or you find someone that's also doing really well, we have to highlight those stories and share it with our networks. Because what oftentimes we do is that we share only the bad, but we have to elevate the people that do well, that are doing good for the community, so that we give them the political courage that they need to be the leaders that they can be.
Do you want to add something?
I think the only thing I would add on is that when you talked about that the people that do have the political courage, let them know that they're doing the right thing, because it helps an individual to say, okay, my community, or there's a community that supports the fact that I'm doing the right thing.
And I'll just share just a very brief example. So I'm on the new email list for the Tea Party, and when they said that the executive action wasn't going to happen, their newsletter literally said, "We won. We scared them," right? They could own that, because for every one person that called Congress, they had 10 people calling Congress against the legislation in the House. So I worked in Congress. When I worked in Congress, and this was before email, I know, no judgment. Actually, I got there at the advent of email. Every time someone would call, our Congress member would consider that 100 voters that person was representing. Every time he received a handwritten letter, that represented 1,000 people in his district. So every time folks say it doesn't make a difference if I sign that petition, or if it doesn't make a difference if I make a phone call, or it doesn't make a difference if I sign a letter, that's not the case. Because they actually see you representing so many other people that didn't have the time, that got too busy. So the power of that has most recently been translated by what the grassroots Tea Party understands, is that by writing those letters, making those phone calls, they feel like they're winning. But there's more of us, and more of our allies, that if we take the time to mobilize and to write those letters and to make those phone calls, they'll have no choice but to pay attention to us.
I think there were 2 more questions over there to the right. The gentleman with the white t-shirt.
My name is Omar Medina. I'm from Santa Rosa, California. And this last lady's comment reminded me of something that I often think of, and that's Alexis de Tocqueville in describing the American democracy. He talked about the vote as kind of the weakest link of it, because in voting, we kind of transfer our responsibility to a representative to take charge. And he talked about the most important thing about the American democracy being civic participation and being involved in civic groups and, you know, in your churches and your PTAs and all that. And I think that's really important, which takes me to the idea of community organizing. And the importance of community organizing, and thinking of politics and not the short term, just a single issue, but thinking about politics in the long term and really taking the time to invest in a community and organize a community to address issues as they arise, but building power in that process, building relationships with elected officials, so that as you build that power, you could create that change, and it's not just that vote. But when it comes time to vote, you have that capacity built to register voters, go door to door, do those types of things. But then it goes to the idea of getting people elected. I said the vote is not as important. I'm currently running for school board, so votes are pretty important to me right now. But I think the lack of elected officials, particularly in California, has led me to learn of, I've made a lot of mistakes in the process. I don't know the process, and having mentors to mentor us to get elected and what that process is like. And so I'd like to see if maybe you could address that. How can we learn to identify elected officials, well, people that want to be elected officials, that share the good values and principles, and then how do we hold them accountable? What type of tactics or methods can we use to do that?
One of the things that Maria Teresa said, that, you know, the letter or the email is very important. I know that I have a sheet, and I ask my staff, if I'm in committee, please let me know where people are on this particular issue, if I'm going to vote on it, and let me know if they're from my community or they're from the Central Valley, because the Central Valley has a different outlook on what we have here, the people that I represent in the city of San Jose. And so letters, if you are calling up your assembly member or Congress member and their staff is not responsive to you, that should be a flag to say, well, then maybe I need to go talk to them and go to the office and build a relationship. Because the reality is, we, and I hope you win, you will realize that we are hopefully accountable to the majority of the people that we represent and their values. That's why they elect us, because they want someone to help them be able to make their dreams come true, whether it's around education or state issues or local issues. I think those are the things that it is about letting them know that you are here and you represent this group of people, and we're not going anywhere because this is our community. And I think one of the things that Maria Teresa talked about is sometimes it takes a long time to make changes. And we have to be patient. That was one thing I had to learn when I got into office. Sometimes I have to be patient because I don't have patience. Like, we've been dealing with this for 2 years, and we need to move on. So I think that those are some of the things. You need to just be at the door,
Well,
letting them know you're here.
Yeah, no, and I also hope, I mean, first of all, I don't believe that if your vote basically abdicates your responsibility. I think that we feel that because all of a sudden the elected officials get suited up and they go off and they're like, oh, now they're the authority. No. Those tax dollars that I was talking about, they pay their salaries. We pay their salaries. They work for us. We're their boss. They need to hear from our direction. And at the end of the day, when you're saying, you know, what kind of resources, the Power Summit. Enjoy the Power Summit, but learn from the Power Summit. We have folks that have everything from how do you start your own startup, to how do you fundraise, to how do you network, to how do you tell your story. That's why we are trying to figure out what is the fastest catalyst for change by bringing together leadership from around the country that really is the best of the best, that believe in building young Americans such as yourself to fill great expectations and possibility. Talk to them, learn from them, ask for their business card. They are donating their time, flying from across the country, many of them leaving their families, for you guys to learn, because we need to be the catalyst for change, and the only way we do that is by sharing information and taking advantage of the space.
Well, Maria Teresa, Kumar in California, State Assembly Speaker Pro Tem Nora Campos, thank you so much for this discussion.
Thank you.
It was great. I think we all learned a lot. I hope you all enjoy it, and I think
And
that's
thank you
all
to
the time that we
moderator.
have
Thank
for
you.
now.
Gracias.
Well, thank you so much.